Stand up.
And now, Stand Up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, would staring at this spreadsheet any longer allow me to enter a new parallel dimension where spreadsheet files stare back at you instead? And with Christmas decorations being put away for the new year, where am I going to go to get my tree ornament dumpster dive on? And now, the podcast host who will gladly remove your Christmas inflatables with his nature-killing machete, Pete Dominic!
Yes, if there were a way to make money that was different from what I am doing here, and thank you for your support, if that were a job after the holidays to take down your Christmas ornaments with a knife of some sort, I would bravely and nobly take that job because that's how much I hate them. Pico, thank you very much, and thank you for pressing play, for downloading, for writing a recommendation, and of course, for signing up for a paid subscription for this podcast. I've got an awesome one for you today. Professor, author, historian, retired Army colonel, West Point grad, the great Andrew Bacevich joins me for a wide-ranging conversation. Very happy to share that with you. And I called up J.L. Cauvin, who is a hilarious and brilliant comedian. I love to get his take on all things life and politics and comedy. We had another great one, including listening to a couple of his recent clips and bits. That was a fun, different thing to do. So, two very different guests joining me today. Thank you for your feedback on yesterday. Thank you for all the kind messages over the loss of Bob Saget, but he was the kind of person that we all lost. And so everybody feels that same, I think, sense of sadness when someone that brings so much joy. But he also did a lot of nice things for me personally and for my career, and we just always got along so well. So when I watched our YouTube interview last night, or the video of our interview, I posted it on YouTube, I got pretty worked up, and I just couldn't focus on doing this opening news segment, but I am back, and I've got a good one for you. Tons to talk about. Do just want to mention Saturday night, we'll be in Pennsylvania near Philadelphia. It's King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Christian Finnegan, Ophira Eisenberg, and myself. The show is on. The Sunday show is postponed. We'll reschedule the Stone Harbor, New Jersey one, but we will be in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania on Saturday night. If you're anywhere near that and you feel safe and comfortable enough to join us, we really hope to see you there at Soul Joel's Comedy Club, King of Prussia. He's a great guy. Very excited to work with Ophira and Christian for the first time this Saturday night. But first, I've got a whole bunch of clips to play for you here on what we call The Last 24. Yeah, let's take a look back at what happened yesterday in America and in the world. And guess who's bringing you the news today? It's Indeed.com/standup. If you're hiring, you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. Indeed.com/standup. Okay, what have we got for you today? Dr. Fauci was on Capitol Hill. President Biden, Vice President Harris were in Atlanta giving major speech on voting rights, although activists want more than just a speech. But what really matters is Joe Manchin at this point, a couple of other senators, I guess it turns on. COVID continues to rage across the country, and a few other random clips that I've got for you. But I've got like 10 minutes of this Dr. Fauci stuff. So if you already heard it or you don't want to hear it, then go ahead and fast forward. But I loved this yesterday. I liked all this. He was also on Chris Hayes on MSNBC last night after all of this went down yesterday. Before we get to the stuff with Rand Paul, you got to hear this from Senator Roger Marshall, who spent a lot of his time criticizing health authorities who were testifying. But he asked Dr. Fauci if he'd be willing to submit a financial disclosure. And listen to this back and forth. And at the very end, Fauci calls Senator Marshall on a hot mic. He whispers, Jesus Christ, what a moron. Here it is.
Dr. Fauci, according to Forbes, you have an annual salary in 2020 was $434,000. You oversee over $5 billion in federal research grants. As the highest paid employee in the entire federal government, yes or no, would you be willing to submit to Congress and the public a financial disclosure that includes your past and current investments. After all, your colleague, Dr. Walensky, and every member of Congress submits a financial disclosure that includes their investments.
I don't understand why you're asking me that question. My financial disclosure is public knowledge and has been so for the last 37 years or so, 35 years that I've been director.
The big tech giants are doing an incredible job of keeping it from being public. We'll continue to look for it. Where would we find it?
All you have to do is ask for it. You're so misinformed. It's extraordinary.
Why am I misinformed? This is a huge issue. Wouldn't you agree with me that you see things before members of Congress would see them, so that there's an air of appearance that maybe some shenanigans are going on? I don't think that's. I assume that's
Senator,
not the case.
What are you talking about?
It's not the case.
My financial disclosures are public knowledge and have been so. You are getting amazingly wrong information.
So I cannot find them. Our office cannot find them. Where would they be if they're public knowledge? Where?
It is totally accessible to you if you want it.
For the public. Is it accessible to the public?
To the public.
Great. We look forward to reviewing it.
You are totally incorrect.
Well, we look forward to reviewing it.
Senator Marshall, Dr. Fauci has answered you. It is public information, and he's happy to give it to you if you would ask. Senator Moran.
Fauci, the real Fauci. What a moron. Jesus Christ. Let's see. I think I can tune it up for you a little bit. Turn it up the volume. What a moron. Jesus Christ. Yeah, so anyway, that was a pretty bad moment for Senator Roger Marshall, because he made a complete jackass of himself when he demanded Fauci give him records that anyone could get. You just have to request a disclosure from NIH. It's public record. And a reporter yesterday, Liz Esley White, just posted it on Twitter because she had asked for this back in 2020. So she just shared the answer to the question Roger Marshall's own staff couldn't get because she had it last year. By the way, not a great moment for Dr. Fauci either. I mean, it's satisfying to hear him call someone a name like that to some extent. But is it helpful? Is that what Senator... Is that what Dr. Fauci wanted to have happen? If so, probably not a great moment for him, in my opinion. But anyway, if you thought that was bad, wait till you hear Rand Paul. If you haven't heard Senator Rand Paul and this back and forth with Dr. Fauci, it's riveting, it's dramatic, and it's getting fairly raw in these exchanges between Senator Rand Paul and Dr. Anthony Fauci.
Do you really think it's appropriate to use your $420,000 salary to attack scientists that disagree with you?
The email you're referring to was an email of Dr. Collins to me. If you look at the email
that you responded to and hurried up and said, I can do it. We got something in Wired magazine.
No. I think in usual fashion, Senator, you are distorting everything about me.
Did you ever object to Dr. Collins' characterization of them as friends? Did you write back to Dr. Collins and say, no, they're not friends, they're esteemed scientists, and it would be beneath me
I did not
do that? You responded to him that you would do it, and you immediately got an article in Wired, and you sent it back to him and said, hey, look, I've got him. I nailed him in Wired of all scientific publications.
That's not what went on. There you go again. You just do the same thing every hearing.
But Dr. Fauci came prepared today, and he basically told a riveting and very dramatic story about what happens after Senator Rand Paul attacks him like this, takes things out of context, and demonizes him for his own purposes to raise money. But listen to Dr. Fauci. I haven't heard this. It's dramatic.
What happens when he gets out and accuses me of things that are completely untrue is that all of a sudden that kindles the crazies out there, and I have threats upon my life, harassment of my family and my children with obscene phone calls, because people are lying about me. Now, I guess you could say, well, that's the way it goes. I can take the hit. Well, it makes a difference because, as some of you may know, just about 3 or 4 weeks ago, on December 21st, a person was arrested who was on their way from Sacramento to Washington, D.C. at a speed stop in Iowa. And the police asked him where he was going, and he was going to Washington, D.C. to kill Dr. Fauci. And they found in his car an AR-15 and multiple magazines of ammunition. because he thinks that maybe I'm killing people.
And then Dr. Fauci actually killed Rand Paul's reputation, or he uncovered the game. He pulled the curtain back. He showed why Rand Paul is doing this, and he even held up a little picture of the graphic.
So I ask myself, why would Senator want to do this? So go to Rand Paul website, and you see Fire Dr. Fauci with a little box that says, contribute here. You can do $5, $10, $20, $100. So you are making a catastrophic epidemic for your political gain.
And there it is. He really called him out. But Rand Paul went on Fox News with Tucker Carlson last night, and Dr. Fauci went over to MSNBC with Chris Hayes, where Chris did a really interesting segment providing some historical context on Dr. Fauci's role during the AIDS epidemic and how he was attacked then by AIDS activists, but later became very close personal friends with some of the leaders of that activism. And then he also talked about how much he appreciated it. I highly recommend you watch the whole segment, but I just wanted to play one part of Dr. Fauci last night on All In with Chris Hayes. This is where he gets done talking about the AIDS activists and giving them credit and respect, and talks about what's different with the anti-vax activist movement and the threats that he's facing today.
What we're having now is outright lies that clearly are in the realm of politics. I mean, that thing I showed at the hearing is very, very true. We were having a hearing today, Chris, that was a tough hearing. There were tough questions that were asked on both sides of the aisle. I mean, the Democrats, clearly, there was not a piece of cake. They were asking very good questions about what the administration was doing. And the Republicans themselves, led by Senator Burr, were asking questions that were important. And Mitt Romney and Collins and Tuberville and others, including Senator Moran, were there asking tough questions. But what Senator Paul was doing was not even giving anyone a chance to make any explanation, nothing productive or constructive. It was totally ad hominem, literally from the get-go, before you could get a word out of your mouth. That's entirely different than the AIDS activists from the 1980s. It's fundamentally different.
And let me just try to point out the fundamental difference, if you will. The difference was the AIDS activists were demanding that the federal government pay attention to what was happening and fund research to help find a cure and treatments for HIV/AIDS. Now we actually have a treatment. We have a miracle vaccine, many of them. And these activists are crying out saying that it'll make you a lizard person. That's a huge, huge difference, and any number of other just ridiculous and crazy conspiracies about the vaccine makers, and more. Planning to criticize, planning to debate and argue. I had Dr. Peter Hotez on to talk about it all yesterday, as a matter of fact. But the criticisms that are being made from the right, the far right, right-wing media, Joe Rogan to Tucker Carlson to Alex Jones, are not the AIDS activists of the 80s. And to compare the two is wildly disrespectful and incongruent. There, I said it. Let's go back, though, to Capitol Hill, where the senator from Alabama, whose last job was head football coach, asked a really dumb question. Fauci gave a very good answer, and unfortunately, you're pretty sure as you're listening to Fauci, Dr. Fauci talked to Senator Tuberville, that Senator Tuberville has one main question was, who is this placebo fella? Who is he? Tell me more about him, and why did he die?
First, Dr. Fauci, I just want to ask you this for my constituents back in Alabama. Ivermectin.
Oh, boy.
40-year drug. Now, my constituents read this. They hear about it and all this. 40-year drug. They call it a wonder drug. It's about a nickel a tablet. It's done wonders supposedly in India, several other places. And then you have this new antiviral pill that we're coming out. And my constituents saying this thing's going to cost $500, $600, $700 each. Could you give me a rundown on between the difference in those two, what you think about them, get it on record here so I can tell my people back home, this is what Dr. Fauci says.
Sure. So Paxlovid, the drug from Pfizer, has shown in a randomized placebo-controlled trial to be highly effective to the point of 89%, almost 90%.
What's it called?
Paxlovid.
Okay.
It's made by Pfizer. And has been shown in a very well-controlled, randomized, placebo-controlled trial that if you take that drug compared to the placebo within the first 3 to 5 days, within the first 3 days, you have about an 89% chance of preventing you from going to the hospital or dying. There were no deaths in the Paxlovid group, and there were several deaths in the placebo group. That's Paxlovid. Ivermectin has had non-controlled trials suggesting that it might be effective, mostly anecdotal. The the NIH guidelines panel have looked at that data and felt there's not sufficient evidence to say that it works or it doesn't. The WHO recommends strongly against it and suggests that it might actually be harmful. The NIH active studies are doing a whole bunch of studies with ivermectin as well as others to try and settle it once and for all to prevent people from taking it if it doesn't work, because it could be toxic. So there's a world of difference between ivermectin and Paxlovid.
You got that, Senator Coach? Is that straight? Does that help you understand the difference here? You got any more questions? Go ahead. Feel free to ask them to one of the best experts that you have access to. Okay, and now here's Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut trying to provide a little bit of cover for Dr. Fauci and criticizing his colleagues, his Republican colleagues, and others in the Senate.
And thank you for calling out this agenda for what it is. An attempt to score political points, to build a political power base around the denial of science and around personal attacks on you and your family. On social media, I follow many of President Trump's advisors and family members, and they make a sport out of attacking you personally in some of the most vicious, hateful, ugly ways that are possible. And they do it because it gets clicks. They don't do it because they're legitimately engaged in a honest debate about the science surrounding COVID. Those people attack you because it gains them political followers.
All right. So that is from yesterday's Senate hearing where Dr. Fauci testified. And while we're talking about more COVID-related news, here's a couple more things to play for you. This is the Secretary of Health and Human Services. He's the former Attorney General of California. Before that, a congressman, of course, a Democrat, Xavier Becerra, on CNN yesterday, talking about how serious a consequence it would be, a matter of life and death, if the Supreme Court overturned the federal government's policies towards mandates for vaccinations for the two cases that we heard argued on Friday and talked about with Professor Siegel on the Saturday Extra show of Stand Up. Here's Xavier Becerra talking about the consequences, potential consequences. I totally fucking nailed that intro to this clip, by the way. I just got an award, walked into the shed.
And if they don't, well, I think that will be on their conscience. I think there's some clear authority, legal authority, for us to move forward as we have proposed, both for the private sector workforce and for the healthcare workforce. And we understand that if we don't get people vaccinated and covered this way, people will die. And if you're a healthcare worker, for sure.
All right, there he is, Secretary of Health and Human Services, Xavier Becerra, yesterday. And now here is the CEO of Pfizer talking about they got another new vaccine coming out that's going to help with the Omicron variant and everything else, apparently. So here he is on CNBC. I think his name is Albert Boulos. He's Greek guy.
Also, we are working on a new version of our vaccine, a version that will be effective against Omicron as well. It's not that will not be effective against the other variants, but against Omicron as well. And the hope is that we will achieve something that will have way, way better protection, particularly against infections, because the protection against the hospitalizations and the severe diseases, it is reasonable right now with the current vaccines, as long as you are having, let's say, the third dose. This vaccine will be ready in March. I don't know if we will need it. I don't know if and how it will be used, but we'll be ready. And in fact, we already starting manufacturing some of these quantities at risk. So if there is a need for that vaccine, that we will have some immediately, because there are a lot of governors that would like to see it immediately.
All right, there he is, the Pfizer CEO. I really think Pfizer should have somebody else address an American audience because, unfortunately, Americans are conditioned to hear certain accents, certain European accents, and refer to them only as villains in like a Bond film. Like that guy sounds like a villain in a Bond film, and it's not his fault. He's simply Greek. It's super racist to think that, but we can't fix that. Can't we just have some other really attractive person or even maybe a British accent that we can trust more than a Greek accent? Hey, where are all the Greek people going? Don't turn me off. You know, you felt it too. And here's a fun story coming out of Canada where they've come up with a unique way to get people to get vaccinated. If you want liquor or weed, you gotta get a jab.
Starting January 18th, Quebec will require a vaccine passport to enter all liquor and cannabis stores in an effort to keep Omicron from spreading. First dose appointments have now increased from 1,500 per day to 6,000.
Yeah, a massive increase in people having to get the shot. If you're going to make it required to enter a venue where your vice is purchased, where your treatment, where your medicine, if you will, lives, liquor and weed, you're going to have to get the jab. People ran in Quebec to get the jab, so maybe that'll work here. Although a lot of the conservative states where the under or unvaccinated live don't have as much weed and liquor, so maybe it wouldn't. All right, well, the other big story yesterday was that the president of the United States and vice president of the United States went to Atlanta, where President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris called for changing the Senate filibuster to ensure voting rights bills passed. President seeking to swing momentum behind voting rights bills that have stalled in Congress because of a near unified Republican opposition and a couple of Democrats as well. Well, black activists say, and voting rights activists in general, that the time, at least according to a lot of people I heard and read, the time for speeches is over, no matter how good they are. They need action plan on voting rights. But what could be done when the only thing that can happen is to sway Joe Manchin and a couple of other senators, and not to vote for voting rights, but to vote for them without the filibuster rule? President Biden in Atlanta yesterday.
How do you want to be remembered? At consequential moments in history, they present a choice. Do you want to be on the side of Dr. King or George Wallace? Do you want to be on the side of John Lewis or Bull Connor? Do you want to be on the side of Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis? This is the moment to decide, to defend our elections, to defend our democracy.
Yes, I like that. I agree with that. This is the time to pick sides. And here's more from President Biden.
I did not live the struggles of Douglas, Tubman, King, Lewis, Goodman, Cheney, Squandered, countless others, known and unknown. I did not walk in the shoes of generations of students who walked these grounds, but I walked other grounds because I'm so damn old I was there as well. They think I'm kidding, man. Seems like yesterday, the first time I got arrested. Anyway.
All right. I thought that was pretty funny, actually. And one more from President Biden in Atlanta. We'll hear from Kamala Harris. And unfortunately, Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham had something to say about this, too. But a lot of folks remarked on this one passage, this clip. Here he is, President Biden, calling it a coup attempt. A coup attempt!
The first time in American history to stop the peaceful transfer of power. They failed. They failed. But democracy's victory was not certain, nor is democracy's future. That's why we're here today, to stand against the forces in America that value power over principle, forces that attempted a coup against the legally expressed will of the American people by sowing doubt, inventing charges of fraud, seeking to steal the 2020 election from the people.
All right, there you go. President Biden yesterday in Atlanta. Here's Vice President Kamala Harris also making comments. For some reason, the audio, it's the same feed everywhere. There's a loud buzz on the audio. Sorry about that. Nothing I can do about it. But here she is. I think you can get past it. This is worth listening to.
Senate Republicans have exploited arcane rules to block these bills. And let us be clear, the Constitution of the United States gives the Congress the power to pass legislation, and nowhere does the Constitution give a minority the right to unilaterally block legislation. The American people have waited long enough. The Senate must act. And the bottom line is this: years from now, our children and our grandchildren, they will ask us about this moment. They will look back on this time, and they will ask us not about how we felt. They will ask us, what did we do? We cannot tell them that we let a Senate rule stand in the way of our most fundamental freedom.
There you go. Two former senators, the Vice President and President of the United States, Kamala Harris, and Joe Biden, talking about getting rid of this arcane rule. While Mitch McConnell is warning that if that happens, you're going to be very sorry. Here is his warning on the Senate floor yesterday.
If my colleague tries to break the Senate to silence those millions of Americans, we will make their voices heard in this chamber in ways that are more inconvenient for the majority and this White House than what anybody has seen in living memory. Last year, the Senate passed major bipartisan legislation on infrastructure, on hate crimes, on government funding, on competing with China. Last year, senators helped speed through non-controversial nominations. So what would a post-nuclear Senate look like? I assure you, it would not be more efficient or more productive. I personally guarantee it.
And then there was a certain senator from South Carolina who had this to say.
As to voting rights itself, I think this is the most hyped, manufactured issue in a long time. This is a problem in search of it's not a problem in search of a solution, it's a manufactured problem. States under our Constitution are supposed to run elections. In my state, I think we do a pretty good job. There are some efforts to change election laws throughout the country as more and more people vote by mail. I think it's incumbent that you have the same voter identification requirements by voting by mail as you do in person. It'd be so easy to manipulate that system. The bottom line here is this is an effort by the Democratic leader to basically say that Republicans at our heart are a bunch of racists when it comes to voting.
All right, well, that was absolutely enraging, but I'm going to move on, take a breath, and let's get to Dr. Jason Johnson, who wasn't buying any of it, and I'm not sure I agree with this criticism completely, only because I'm not sure what we can do about Joe Manchin, but I love Jason, and I think this is worth it. From MSNBC's Joy Reid, the readout on MSNBC yesterday.
So first, Joe, I want to let you know that we don't know what the history books will say about Mitch McConnell, because if we talk about his voter suppression, isn't that critical race theory? And aren't they trying to make that illegal too? So we don't even know. We don't know what the history books could say about this when we get there. Here's the problem. It's very clear what their plan is. They want politicians to be able to pick voters instead of voters picking politicians. And here's why this is important based on what Biden said today. Look, it was a forceful speech. That's great. That's wonderful. The truth of the matter is Biden said at a town hall in October that he was in favor of some sort of reform. I want to jump us ahead, not just to the future of 50 years from now historically, but I want to jump us ahead to next week. So let's say the vote to reform the filibuster fails. What is the next step? What can this administration do? This is the plan that activists are talking about. Don't come down here without a plan. I have said before, you could send federal election monitors to all 50 states. Hey, if you're violating people's civil rights, we will snatch your highway money. Joy, you've made the suggestion. Attach infrastructure bill money to election reform. You can't get any of this $1.8 billion. You've had Van Newkirk at the Atlantic that said, hey, look, if you're suppressing votes, that could affect reapportionment. There are plans right here, right now, that Joe Biden could have talked about today for what he will do if the vote doesn't work. That's why people are frustrated. That's why history will judge him almost as harshly as it judges Mitch McConnell, because he hasn't used all the power at his resources and he hasn't added a stick to the carrot that he was trying to offer to some people today.
All right, there's Dr. Jason Johnson. Agree with him or not. Always vociferous, always honest, always very passionate and articulate on the old readout on MSNBC yesterday. Now, I got three more clips to play for you that don't fit with anything else, but I do just want to share them with you here on The Last 24. Here's the Fed chairman who was on Capitol Hill also testifying yesterday, taking tough questions from senators. And here he is talking about the fact that labor has a lot of power right now. Momentum is with labor, and I think that's a really very good thing for the most part, for sure, right? Here he is, Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve.
I know employers who are hiring younger people out of school are finding that they have to have one day to work from home, or they'll go to someplace else where they can get that. So it's a market right now where labor is very short. As a result, workers have a lot of leverage, and that may persist. So I think there's a lot of different things.
All right, there you go, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. And I'll talk more about that with experts, labor historians. I'm interested in that, and I hope that you will be too. All right, here is comedian Jim Gaffigan talking to comedian Joe Rogan on the most popular podcast in the world. And Joe respects great comedians. I think that's fair to say, is much as, he loves Jim Gaffigan. Jim's been on the show, I know, a lot of times. And Jim Gaffigan has recently become a very outspoken guy. He's now being called a leftist. He is I always thought he was a Republican and a Catholic. I know he's a very Catholic guy, religious guy, but he has become very outspoken over the past couple of years, well, over the time that Donald Trump was president. Here he is on Joe Rogan talking about who he would prefer, anybody over Donald Trump again. And then Rogan tries to say that Biden isn't running the show and he's just a figurehead and he's too old and dementia, he's insinuating. But here it is. I think it's worth it.
Well, I would take Biden's corpse over Trump.
Well, it's not really Biden, right? It's the cabinet. It's the people that are running the whole administration. That's what's going on now. It's not Biden. It's all the other folks that are moving things.
But I still look at along the same lines of what you just said. So Betsy DeVos, Stephen Miller, you take all those people over. Even Mike Pence, you take him over. Say what you want about Kamala or whatever. It's like any of those people. And I know I'll probably get murdered by some Trumpy, but it's like,
I don't think she's the best example. Storied history of incarcerating people and keeping people in jail past the time they were supposed to be released, to use them as cheap labor for the state of California.
Mike Pence believed in you could do therapy to get rid of gay.
Wait a minute, you know?
All right, Rogan was kidding there at the end, and the fact that Jim Gaffigan doesn't know how to pronounce Kamala Harris's name was a little shitty, in my opinion, but there you go. I thought that was worth sharing. And finally, one more clip. On Monday night, they had the National College Football National Championship, and the Georgia Bulldogs won. They beat the Alabama, what is their mascot? Roll Tide? Whatever. I'm not a huge sports fan at this point and don't know how to say things about sports and stuff. But I did think this was hilarious that the quarterback of the winning team went on morning television. This is ABC's Good Morning America with former football player himself, Michael Strahan, talking to the football player who didn't get any sleep and was probably drunk.
Stetson, good morning, my friend. How you feeling this morning after that incredible performance last night? Have you had a chance to get any sleep?
A few hours. Not many. I've been wondering about. Not many.
Well, you're gonna have plenty.
All right, he has no idea where he is, and I just absolutely love that. All right, let me just bring you some COVID news.
COVID news.
Two headlines before I get to the rest of the news in the news dump. That's not necessarily politics or COVID related. More than half of Europe's population may be infected with Omicron in weeks, according to the World Health Organization. A third city in China has announced a coronavirus lockdown. 62,000 students and school staff in Los Angeles test positive for COVID-19. New Jersey declared a state of emergency over the Omicron variant. The governor, Phil Murphy, said New Jersey was recording 35,000 new coronavirus cases a day, with more than 10,000 current hospitalizations. The new governor of Virginia also declared a limited state of emergency aimed at helping hospitals. And officials are predicting, quote, most people are going to get COVID as global cases reach new high. I still haven't, but I feel like you probably do, in that it's coming if you haven't yet. Early studies continue to suggest the Omicron variant may cause less severe illness, especially among those who are vaccinated. Still, the U.S. surpassed its record for coronavirus hospitalizations with Tuesday's total of 145,982 people in U.S. hospitals with COVID-19, including 4,462 children, passing records set on January last year during the previous peak of the pandemic in the country. Bolivia's vice president tested positive for coronavirus for a third time. United Airlines has said that 3,000 employees have tested positive for coronavirus. Global cases reached a new pandemic high. And Chicago schools are set to resume in-person classes after the teachers union and the city reached a deal. That is your
COVID news
for Wednesday, January 12th, 2022. Thank you for the jingle there, Pete. And why don't we get a news dump jingle while we're at it? Because it's time now for the rest of the headlines. Not COVID, not politics. It's everything else that I found and saw and heard throughout the day as I take in the information and pump it back out to you. Hit it, Pete.
Sleek, vigilant cougar over garbage can it jumps. Now a SoCal celebrity on today's news dump.
All right, well, I just asked Pete Coe about what inspired that story. And apparently, this cougar has become famous in Hollywood. The mountain lion, better known as P22, is on the prowl, caught on camera, and basking in the bright lights of the big city, according to ABC7. That's a fun story. Here's a less fun story for today's news dump. This one is from North Korea, where they launched a second ballistic missile in a week, according to South Korea. And it even grounded some flights, apparently, some U.S. flights, because they weren't sure where that missile was going. So that's a lot of fun. I like this story. The Justice Department under Merrick Garland and Joe Biden has created a new unit focused on domestic terrorism. They probably should have had this unit back in the early 90s or before that, probably when the Klan was active anyway. Justice Department, never too late, establishing a specialized unit focused on domestic terrorism. The department's top national security official told lawmakers Tuesday as he described a, quote, elevated threat from violent extremists in the United States to be led by Assistant Attorney General Matthew Olson, who testified yesterday, or days after the nation observed the one-year anniversary of the insurrection. He said the number of FBI investigations into suspected domestic violent extremists has more than doubled since the spring of 2020. And there's a lot more to follow up about that, but that's a good start. The governor of California has allocated $22.5 billion to the climate crisis in a budget proposal. And his budget proposal doesn't mean it's going to become law, but he called the California Blueprint, and it's to collectively advance the state's climate and opportunity agenda and deliver community resilience. A lot to dig into on that story. This is a weird one. Companies are recalling home elevators to address a safety concern. Who has a home elevator? Is this for Mitt Romney? I don't know anybody who's got an elevator. Artie Lang used to have an elevator at his shore house in Jersey. It's the only home I've ever, I think, been in with one. But the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission said that 3 elevator manufacturers would have voluntary recalls of roughly 69,000 residential elevators. What a burden that's going to be. How do you recall an elevator anyway? On an American Airlines flight in Honduras, it was delayed because a passenger entered the plane and caused extensive damage, wrecking the flight controls. A customer entered the open flight deck while it was on the ground, of course, and caused damage to the aircraft, apparently. No details about what caused the passenger to damage the aircraft, but my guess is the pilot was having an affair with his wife. I mean, I have no information on that. It's just my guess. Who the hell would do that? All right, what's next? Oh, this is a fun story. The leader of a neo-Nazi group was sentenced to 7 years in prison for threatening journalists and activists who worked to expose anti-Semitism. He's a 25-year-old man from the state of Washington who was convicted by federal jury on 5 counts, including interfering with a federally protected activity, sending out threatening communication, and conspiracy to commit other offenses. He is part of the leadership of an organization called Atomwaffen Division, a neo-Nazi organization that the Southern Poverty Law Center describes as a terroristic hate group. And I think that new unit at the Department of Justice probably knows a good bit about him already. And speaking of Nazis, the Catholic Church in Rome on Tuesday, because they got them everywhere, strongly, especially where very white people are, a lot of white people, it seems like there's more Nazis, sorry, but the Catholic Church in Rome on Tuesday strongly condemned as, quote, offensive and unacceptable a funeral procession outside a local church in which the casket itself was draped in a Nazi flag and mourners gave the fascist salute. Photos and video of the scene outside the St. Lucia Church followed the Monday funeral service, were published by the Italian online news portal Open. So that's a lot of fun. That's a fun story. I like the Nazi stories. This is actually sincerely a good one. The U.S. Coast Guard pulled 176 human beings from an overloaded, unseaworthy wooden sailing vessel as it approached the Florida Keys from Haiti. They were 176 Haitians. The rescue effort unfolded Monday after a flight crew with Customs and Border Protection, Air, and Marine Operations spotted the 60-foot vessel some 25 miles northeast of Anguilla Cay, Bahamas, according to the Coast Guard press release. This is also good news. Bank of America has decided to slash the amount it charges customers when they spend more than they have in their accounts and plans to eliminate entirely its fees for bounced checks. It's the latest move by the nation's biggest banks to roll back the overdraft fees they long charge customers, fees that often amount to hundreds of dollars a year for frequent overdraft users. And you can thank Democrats for that one, including Senator Elizabeth Warren, who I think led the fight on that. And sad news about Magawa. Magawa was a rat, and apparently it was credited with finding over 100 landmines and explosives in Cambodia, and now it is dead at the age of 8. The African giant pouched male rat was the most successful landmine detecting rat for this nonprofit organization, APOPO, which is Tanzania-based group, trains the species to detect landmines and tuberculosis, dubbing them hero rats. Yeah, well, that's sad news, but interesting that they can use those rats for such good purposes. Here's another crazy story. This is a miraculous story, but a helicopter, medical helicopter carrying an infant, crashed near a church, but everybody survived. This is in Upper Darby, Pennsylvania. A pilot crash-landed a medical helicopter without casualties in a residential area of suburban Philadelphia. And now I get to joke about that this weekend because nobody died. And we're performing near Philadelphia, so that should work. Another happy story, 2 more. A classic winter scene of kids playing on an icy pond turned frightening in Denver over the weekend, according to KDVR Denver, where a major tragedy was averted. 4 children, reportedly related, were playing on the pond near this apartment complex. The ice gave way, and 3 of them fell into the water. But this 23-year-old hero, Dusty Talavera, who lived in an apartment building near the pond, happened to be looking out the window when the kids tumbled into the water. And he says, before I realized it, I was out there in the middle of the pond pulling 2 kids out. The young woman found the ice too slippery to gain traction. She treaded water in the 15-foot deep pond, struggling to keep herself and a 6-year-old in the water afloat. This is just an amazing story out of Colorado. And finally, the U.S. Mint has begun shipping quarters honoring Maya Angelou. The United States Mint says it's begun shipping quarters featuring the image of poet Maya Angelou, the first coins in its American Women Quarters program. The Mint's program will issue 20 quarters over the next 4 years honoring women and their achievements in shaping the nation's history. And I think that is a great story to end today's news dump on. All right. Coming up, comedian, lawyer, and the brilliant and hilarious J.L. Cauvin joins me. Before that, I've got retired Army Colonel, author, and historian Andrew Bacevich. But I first have to tell you about my partner for today's show, Indeed.com. And you know, it's 2022, and this is the year you're going to make the leap and turn your passion into profit, but you need the right team to make it happen. Indeed makes it easy to hire and build a team with the right skills to make your dreams a reality. So if you're hiring right now, your company, your firm, and you need Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. And Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all the other job sites combined, and several listeners have already told me that it's worked to help them find valuable members for their company, their team. So start hiring right now with a $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/stand-up. Go there right now, whether you're thinking about it or not. Just check it out. Click the link, Indeed.com/stand-up. Claim your $75 credit if you want it before March 31st. Indeed.com/stand-up. Terms and conditions apply. You need to hire. You need Indeed. All right, finally, we are at that part of the show, 46 minutes into it. For goodness sake, that was a lot of news. Hopefully you appreciated it, but you can always skip it if you just want to get to the guests. And J.L. Cauvin coming up. Great conversation with him I think you'll love. Right now, I've got retired Army Colonel, author, historian, and currently the president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, Professor Emeritus at Boston University. He is the author, co-author, or editor of more than a dozen books. He's a Vietnam vet. He's a combat vet. He's also in Iraq. He lost his own son who was fighting in Iraq. So he's a Gold Star family as well. And his new book is called After the Apocalypse, America's Role in a World Transformed. It came out this summer. We haven't caught up in a while, though, and he and I became friends over the years. We've gone out to dinner. I really like him. We've talked several times, and I always love talking to Andrew Bacevich. He's not on social media, but he's so great to talk to. And here is our latest right now. It's so great to get him on the phone. Andy Bacevich, thank you so much for joining me. It's been far too long, and we've been talking, so we've caught up, but it's great to hear your voice. Thank you for joining me.
It's great to be with you, Pete.
I wanted to, first of all, just talk about how you've looked at the world and the threats that Americans and the world faces for most of your career. And I guess I just wonder what experience you had or how you thought about issues that weren't traditional threats, geopolitical threats from other countries and militaries, such as climate change or a pandemic. How much had you thought about that during your writing, during your teaching, and during your active duty military service?
Yeah, I think on that score, my thinking has changed radically over the past, 10, 12 years. Certainly, as somebody who grew up during the Cold War, as somebody who served in the Cold War military, I viewed reality through a Cold War lens. And what that meant was that the principal threats to the well-being of our country were geopolitical, and they were far away. The biggest threat was the Soviet Union on the other side of the planet. The threat was the Viet Cong. The threat was the Koreans. Problems in faraway places. I have come to believe more recently that certainly in the world in which we live today, the principal threats to our well-being are much, much, much closer to home. I mean, COVID is an obvious example. The climate crisis is an obvious example. Porous borders are an obvious example. So I think our approach, our whole conception of national security is screwed up. We should be worrying less about distant threats. We should be worrying a hell of a lot more, paying a hell of a lot more attention to those things that endanger the American people where they live. That's the key phrase, where they live. That's what we got to give more attention to.
What about giving some kind of attention to or thought about changing the way that our Defense Department is constructed or thinks about problems and issues? I know there are all kinds of organizations and individuals in the Defense Department and think tanks that are constantly rethinking about how our military could and should be used. But it seems weird that in this day and age, we don't have a service of some sort that is able to rapidly adapt to different threats. For example, just using the National Guard or even active duty military to adapt to some kind of natural disaster, which we're only going to see more of, much less a pandemic to gear up hospitals and so on. Have you thought about that? Have you written about that?
Well, I mean, you're a little bit, and the point you're making, though, is crucially important, I think. Yeah, that's where the brain power ought to be focused. That's where dollars ought to be spent in greater quantities. Again, dealing with those dangers that threaten us where we live. But since its creation in the aftermath of World War II, the Department of Defense has been devoted to a conception of national security that pays primary attention to the things way out there, Right. And therefore, so much of our discussion of national security focuses on Taiwan, the South China Sea, Ukraine, and not for a second am I suggesting that those don't matter at all. They do matter, but I would argue strongly that the fate of Ukraine matters a whole heck of a lot less than the way that the forests are burning down every year. So there's a misunderstanding of priorities, and the difficulty of correcting that misunderstanding, I think, stems from the fact that the people who run the Department of Defense, the national security apparatus, they are committed to a conception of national security that is akin to a religion, and they can't give it up.
I wonder how that changes. Sometimes I think that's about age, generational concerns, being in the institution maybe for too long. I mean, I want to believe that guys, men and women your age or even a little younger, can adapt their thinking to the current threats and how to adapt to them. But sometimes I just wonder if they've just been there too long.
I think that's true. It is a generational issue. I mean, when I talk to younger people, and I do from time to time, I mean, they take it for granted that climate is the preeminent threat to the well-being of our nation. Now, the people in Washington who call the shots pay lip service to that proposition, but they don't really believe it. At least they don't act upon it. Right. In other words, the people like President Biden, who's even older than I am, and that gets reflected in where money gets spent. So it could be, and maybe this would be some cause for at least modest optimism. It could be that as we old codgers, we baby boomers, as we pass from the scene, perhaps the younger generations will be wiser and will be more willing to rethink the concept of national security and come to a different understanding of where we need to be spending our money.
Let's talk about national security a little bit more. Let's talk about your most recent book, which was published this past year or over the summer. And I hadn't gotten it or read it, but I'm very excited to just talk a little bit about After the Apocalypse, America's Role in a World Transformed. Get the book now by my guest, Andrew Bacevich.
So this is a book that I basically wrote somewhat hastily during the first year of the pandemic. And really, the themes that it discusses correspond to what we just talked about a minute ago. That the conception of national security to which Washington is devoted is obsolete. The threats have changed, and we need to make a fundamental reorientation of our basic policies to make the necessary adjustments. I mean, I say, for example, that the United States Forest Service doesn't have enough airplanes, doesn't have sufficiently capable airplanes to deal with the forest fire threat. Well, we need to spend more money buying airplanes for the Forest Service and probably a little less money buying airplanes for the Air Force. I personally think that the Coast Guard does invaluable work for the country in all kinds of ways. But basically, the Coast Guard is starved for resources. So I'm saying, let's spend more money on the Coast Guard. Let's build some more Coast Guard cutters, and maybe we'll spend a little less money building aircraft carriers for the Navy. That's the kind of thing I believe that ought to be happening. But it doesn't happen because of the chokehold that the existing conception of national security has in Washington, and especially in the Congress, which decides where, how to spend money.
Yeah, I know you have William Hartung at Quincy writing for you, and it's a really interesting and important issue to try to understand how contracts are won in the Defense Department to build ships, and what the difference between building a battleship or destroyer versus a Coast Guard cutter, and how those contracts get lobbied for and get appropriated and approved. It's a very important issue, but that is a hard ship to turn around, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And Bill knows, infinitely more about that than I do. Have you had him on your show?
Yeah, several times, but not in a while. I should.
Yeah.
So after the apocalypse, America's role in a world transformed. What, for example, do you think our role be right now as it pertains to whether it be the Asia Pacific issues and threats, or more imminently, perhaps? It seems like we're on the eve of a war between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I don't know if we are. Certainly that would be the conclusion you would reach reading the New York Times and the Washington Post. I'm not sure that the reporting we're getting from those papers and other similar outlets is as objective as it might be. But let me broadly sketch out what I think would be the basis of adjusting our global posture.
Sure.
And I'll do it by dividing the world into three big chunks.
Okay.
One of those chunks is Europe. One of those chunks is the Middle East, and the third of those chunks is the Asia Pacific region. I have long believed, with regard to Europe, that the Europeans are fully capable of defending themselves, or more broadly, of addressing any security challenges that they face. That's a long-winded way of saying, take care of the Russia problem. And therefore, I believe it's time for the United States to extract itself from NATO. Not tomorrow. Give them a timeline. Maybe we're going to do this over a 10-year period, step by step. Oblige Europe to take the necessary steps to deter or defend against the possibility of a Russian threat. They got the money, they got the technology, they got the people. They can do it if they're obliged to do it. And why should we withdraw from NATO? Because we have accomplished our mission. And when NATO was created back in 1949, Western Europe was weak, vulnerable, needed our support in a material sense, needed our support in a psychological sense. The recovery of Europe from World War II is one of the great achievements of American statecraft. Good. Now we say, mission accomplished, we're going home. Let's turn to the Middle East. Since basically 1980, when Jimmy Carter declared that the Persian Gulf was a vital national security interest, we have been engaged in trying to pacify the region using military power. Pacify means avert wars, intervene to win wars, spread democracy. It has had a lot of different meanings, but here we are in the year of our Lord 2022, and the Middle East is still screwed up.
Yeah.
And further efforts on our part ain't going to fix things. Now, that doesn't, and therefore my view would be end the U.S. military presence in the region. That doesn't mean isolationism. It does mean that we rely on what ought to be creative diplomacy to persuade nations in the region, preeminently Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, that they need to figure out a way to coexist. And it's not our job to try to police the region. Turn to Asia. Well, there it seems to me that the rise of China has enormous geopolitical implications and understandably has created great wariness among other nations in the region. Japan, South Korea, Vietnam, all of whom are in the habit of looking to us in one way or another for security guarantees. Therefore, I believe that in that part of the world, probably the status quo needs to be maintained, that we need to preserve some kind of a military presence in order to try to prevent instability from taking root. And that's a delicate proposition. It's a delicate proposition because guess what? The Chinese are engaged in all kinds of activities that don't seem to be conducive to stability.
Right.
But my bottom line argument is that even though I favor getting the U.S. military out of Europe, getting the U.S. military out of the Middle East, I favor keeping the U.S. military in East Asia as a stabilizing force.
See, he's a reasonable man. See, these three different parts of the world need to be thought about separately and differently. And certainly there is a wide debate and discussion on that today. But you have been writing about this for so long in so many books, and I think that your point of view has won out slowly, albeit slowly, over the years.
I'm not going to agree with you on that point. I think that for example, on NATO, in Washington circles, the idea that the United States should leave NATO is heresy. I mean, absolute heresy.
Right.
There are others who make the same argument that I just made to you. I mean, it's not original with me, but those folks tend not to be, included in the inner circle. If you want to someday get a high post at the State Department, you don't begin by arguing against the U.S. continuing to be part of NATO.
I was actually thinking about your point of view specifically as it pertains to the Middle East. But from what I can tell, you are on the outside looking in with your criticism regarding NATO. What are the pressures that make that thinking on the issue of NATO or Europe, much less anything else, so insulated and protected, do you think?
I don't. It's a good question. I don't have a good answer.
Okay.
I mean, maybe in some remote way, very remote, there are memories of World War II. That when the United States is not there actively sort of keeping a lid on things, that terrible developments occur. I mean, I don't think there's too many people to think that the Federal Republic of Germany today, is on the verge of returning to Nazism. But there may be some nervousness about the ability of the Europeans to behave and to get along. I think that sells them short, but there may be something like that. And also, NATO is a huge bureaucracy. There's a whole bunch of people that have jobs in Brussels and in Mons because NATO exists. And if the U.S. pulled out of it, a lot of those jobs would go away.
It's such an important point. I guess it's not the sexiest point to be made, but it's true of so many different government expenditures that people have jobs at military bases, at the veterans. My understanding is the veterans hospitals are all kinds of screwed up because they were built for a post-World War II generation of where people actually lived in America. Veterans actually lived. And now they're still in many of those places and hard to not very accessible to a lot of veterans, but you can't close them because they're jobs. I mean, it's just one example. There are jobs in the defense industry so a lot of these decisions are very difficult for representatives, congressional representatives to make or to change because it means jobs lost in their districts in the states or in this case in their organizations or industries. So it certainly makes sense. But what about Russia's nukes? Can't it just be as simple as keep an eye on Russia because they got all those nukes?
Well, I mean, from the U.S. perspective, first of all, I think there is a tendency to confuse Putin's Russia with Stalin's USSR.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the USSR was something of a peer competitor with the United States. Certainly it was in terms of military capabilities, and nukes would be a very good example of those capabilities. Putin's Russia has a GDP that's the equivalent of Italy's. I mean, it is not a rich country. They still got nukes. They still produce weapons. They certainly want to take advantage of our follies to embarrass us and to reduce our influence and standing in the world. But I think actually the actual threat that Russia poses is fairly modest. And that's why, again, I think that if the Europeans would just get with the program, they could manage that. Now, let's talk a little bit about Ukraine. And if I had a great answer to Ukraine, I'd be rich and famous. But I think it's always useful. It doesn't have to be sort of definitive. So it's always useful to look at the problem from the other guy's point of view, and to look at Ukraine from the point of view of Putin. Putin claims to believe that the end of the Cold War was a great geopolitical tragedy or catastrophe. And from the point of view of Russia, it was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they lost their empire. The USSR itself disintegrated. Russia went through a period of years of, malaise, economic, the lack of economic growth. And during that period of time, what did the United States and its NATO allies do? Well, they expanded eastward, incorporating even former Soviet states into this alliance, which we would say is a peaceful alliance. But if you're a Russian, your view of NATO might be somewhat different. So I think that quite frankly, I think it's understandable that Putin and other Russians might be resentful at the eastward expansion of NATO, and might be really resentful at the prospect of Ukraine joining the alliance.
Hey.
And so they have pushed back in all kinds of ways, to include engaging in that war that has Russian troops occupying parts of Ukraine itself. I don't endorse that. I don't approve of that. But it does seem to me important to recognize that this is not irrational behavior on Russia's part. From a Russian perspective, it's justified. And I think we have to be, if we're trying to figure out how to avoid having a big war over Ukraine, we have to at least take into consideration the way that Russia's interests have been trampled on since the end of the Cold War, and to take into consideration that as a neighbor to Russia proper, Ukraine might have some importance to Russian security, just like we attribute importance to, Mexico as important to U.S. security.
Right.
So the bottom line is, I think we don't do a good enough job of trying to see things from the other guy's point of view.
Well, you always have in your writing, and the final issue that I certainly wanted to ask you about was the domestic terrorist threat here in the U.S. You've written about the foreign terrorist threat, and you have seen it, and we've all recognized what that is and how it itself changes and evolves given different circumstances in the world. But it would seem that the greater threat, frankly, has always been the domestic terrorist threat, if you count the kind of attempts and successful attacks. Now more than ever, that is the case. So many people talking about our dwindling democracy and the fact that there is seemingly an extremist revolution on the right of militant thinking, white supremacy, anti-government types. And they seem to be carrying out different types of attempts almost every day. I mean, if you look closely at the news, you can see people doing pretty wild things. How much do you think about this? How much are you concerned about the domestic terrorist threat?
Well, I probably don't use the term terror. I'm not saying that it's wrong to use it, but I tend to think of more this this unraveling of our union. I just never imagined growing up, back in the 1950s, that the Constitution itself would become under siege. That so many of our fellow citizens would, at least in the words they speak, would favor the use of violence in order to ensure a political outcome that they happen to favor, and democratic practices be damned. I am mystified about how we got to this situation, mystified and deeply troubled. And it seems to me that really, maybe along with the climate crisis, fixing that has to be our number one priority. And that's why, as somebody who mostly pays attention to foreign policy, that's why I'm so wary of us getting involved in yet more military misadventures, whether in the South China Sea or whether in, the Ukraine or anywhere else. We need to avoid war in order to repair our country. I think that a penchant for misguided war has been at least one, not the only one, but at least one contributing factor to the pathologies that afflict our country, with Trumpism as one example, but only one example.
Yeah.
So we need to fix ourselves, and I think at least one step toward doing that is avoiding any wars in the near future, if we can possibly do so.
I think the answer, I have an answer to what you're mystified by, how we got here.
Yeah. What?
The right-wing media. I mean, media in general has divided us. But
that's a big factor. But
right-wing media, like I remember listening 20 years ago, this guy, maybe a little less, maybe 15 years ago, this guy, Mark Levin, screaming about the Constitution is under threat. And basically, I remember thinking, if I believed what that guy said, I would take up arms, screaming about guns. They're taking your guns every day, day in and day out. And it just got more and more extreme, from Hannity to Tucker Carlson to this guy, Alex Jones. And people believe what they're saying. They believe that their freedoms are under threat and that they're going to take their, and they don't believe the actual threats. That's why I feel like we're in such bad shape, because the actual threats are being more ignored, from a virus to climate, and perceived threats that are being made up, really, or exaggerated by these people in media to make money. They make a shitload of money. That's what I think.
Well, you're making a very powerful argument, and I don't know that right-wing media is this. I'm sure it's not the sole explanation, but as a contributing factor to the mess that we're in, they certainly have played a major role. And you're right. You're right. They're doing it for the money. They're doing it for the money.
How worried are you? Just last question, Andy, about the threat within the military itself. Are you familiar with those three generals who wrote the Washington Post op-ed and other military experts who are saying, the coup could come from within inside the Department of Defense? Is that something that you think about or are concerned with?
I'm not concerned. There's no doubt in my mind that there are people within the ranks of the active duty military that subscribe to, have an ideological perspective that I would find to be deeply disturbing and unconstitutional. But I suspect that that's not as prevalent as some of the reporting might suggest. On the other hand, let's face it, man, I haven't done, a deep dive into the way the military, the kind of thinking within the military that prevails today. And it could well be that I've been out of the Army since 1992. It could well be that I'm sort of thinking that the Army that I was in 1992 is the Army that exists today. Guess what? It's probably not. But I haven't done enough to adjust my thinking.
I mean, the tattoos alone.
Well, that bothers me tremendously. in my day, you couldn't be in uniform if you had a tattoo. Now, what do they call when it's the whole arm of the sleeve?
Yes.
Now they got people. Now they got the cadets, the football players at the Army-Navy game are covered with tattoos.
Right. Is it true? The rumor is it true that how old are you? 74?
Yeah.
Is it true that age 74 you are considering getting one of your arms covered in floral tattoos, a full sleeve, Andy? Is that true?
That may be true for some 74-year-olds, but not for me.
You're not. Oh, I must have read something that was attributed to you that was just false.
And my wife would kill me.
If you had to get one tattoo, which one would your wife allow? Her name in cursive?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. with a heart around it.
Andy Bacevich, the new book, After the Apocalypse. Get it. I'm going to get it, read it, and talk to you again, hopefully very soon. Check out all of the work of the Quincy Institute, and all of the links to Andy's work and everything else that he does are available in today's show notes. So appreciate you joining me again.
Hey, we'll talk to you soon, okay?
All right, there he goes, Andrew Bacevich. I hope you appreciated that, whether you agree or disagree with his analysis. I think his work is really important to include when we're talking about foreign policy, militarism, and all the rest. His new book, After the Apocalypse, America's Role in a World Transformed. And the rest of his books are so good, really, really good. I've got most of them, and I find him to be a valuable source and teacher and professor, and I always love talking to him. He's also become a good friend. Speaking of good friends, my next guest is a hilarious comedian who just taped his most recent album with me as the opening act not too long ago, back in October. We've known each other our whole careers, and he blew up over the pandemic with his dead-on Trump impression. He's the best of the best. You can see him in Chicago at the end of the month. Then he'll be out in San Jose and Southern California at the beginning of February. Utah, February 10th. Go to jlcauvin.com. Also, listen to both of his podcasts, Righteous Prick and Making Podcasts Great Again. Follow him on Twitter at jlcauvin. Subscribe to his YouTube channel, watch his videos there, and hire him to do a custom-tailored video for someone as a gift on the Cameo app. All that at jlcauvin, and all that in today's show notes, along with everything else. Here we go! Soon you'll have your own jingle.
I will?
Yeah, I think you'll get a jingle pretty soon. I try not to...
That's the stand-up with Pete version of like a Hollywood star, like a Walk of Fame star.
I feel bad even suggesting it on the record because I want them to come organic. I want them to come from the artist. But, I think I would like to have a jingle for you. I think it'd be great.
Oh, thanks.
And a lot rhymes with Cauvin, I think so.
Chauvin?
Right.
COVID.
Wow, your jingle is going to have the name of the police officer who killed George Floyd, thus starting a civil rights movement or propelling
my perfect joke, which turns off like 15% of audiences, but I don't really care, is when I go to a show and, 50% of the time it's a really good crowd, 50% of the time it's light. So for light crowds, I go, what's the deal here? Is it because my name looks so similar to Chauvin? People in the community were like, I didn't even know Derek Chauvin did comedy, but really low rent, such and such improv to book him. Like, we're not spending our dollars here to see the guy who killed George Floyd tell jokes. Shouldn't he be in jail? Like, is he on work release?
How does that go over?
Usually, it's a little jarring for some people, but sure. It's one of those, it's once again, one of those, hey, the joke is not about saying Derek Chauvin is anything less than a monster. Like, it's
you
just
don't have
a play on my name. But, like a lot of things, I once had somebody come up to me after a show where I had done a joke about there being too many movies about white male serial killers, too many documentaries and things. It was a joke about like, what about representation? Are you telling me there have been no women serial killers, no killers of color? Or have any trans people done any murdering? And, you know, that the joke being just like, how far will we take needing representation? And a woman came up to me after the show, young person, very nice, very respectful. She was not like condemning me, but she said, "You were really funny, but I think I might stay away from the trans jokes because like they're obviously dealing with a lot of stuff right now." And I didn't shoot. Some comedians might have chewed her out just for deigning to offer any opinion.
Right.
But I said, "Oh no, yeah, I get what you're saying, but that wasn't really a joke about trans people. That was just a joke about diversity in general." But it was one of those trigger words, like you heard trans and you kind of mentally got into even though she was very nice about it, you get into sort of a defensive posture, which is, I think, what people do when I make the Chauvin joke. They kind of go, oh, he mentioned the death of George Floyd. Like that's not, but it's like, that's just a reference point. That's not the focus of the joke. But
you have been doing several gigs in different parts of the country, from Utah to Pennsylvania to Boston. I was with you. Of course, you taped your album in New York City. How has it been going the last few weeks? I want to talk about what happened last Thursday. Where were you, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania?
Correct.
Which, when I say what happened, I'm going to play a bit, and we can just kind of talk about it because it's super relevant. But have the gigs been going pretty good?
Yeah, so far they're good. I mean, the Utah gig, like I have in the next couple of weeks, that's when I head to Chicago, Northern California, Southern California, and Utah. So the gigs so far, not to borrow a quote from my friend Gary Goldman's tweets, but I feel like I am at the absolute top of my game. Like it's a really good feeling that artistically, comedically, confidence-wise, and now, I have fans coming out, and what makes me feel good is nobody's saying, "I wish you'd done more impressions." I'm sort of using this to really show them you're watching an elite comedian, not just some internet gimmick who does impressions on Twitter, but somebody with real chops and real skills that, with the right breaks, could become well known for just stand up. So I think it's nice to have people coming out and not going, I was hoping for, they're just like, wow, like that was great. Like, we love your stuff online. This was an amazing live show. So they've been going well. Like,
I'm so happy to hear that. You sound good, sound positive. You were just in Harrisburg, and you shared a clip from the Comedy Zone there, which is a great backdrop for a comedy club. I usually don't like something so busy, but it's really cool. It's like graffiti on a wall with a bunch of laughing mouths. I like it a lot. So before I play this clip, I think maybe you could set it up a little bit.
Sure.
You are, in fact, the hero that America needs right now.
I think so. I was about 15 minutes into my set, and I have one bit about Trump. So that's sort of a little token. Here's a 5-minute Trump impression bit for you, because I know some of you, if you're here to see me, there's a good chance that that's one of the things you like about me. So I'm about 30 seconds into it, and a table of 3 men, 3 women. 2 of the men have beards but no mustache, like that kind of look. The white Al-Qaeda look.
Oh my God. Amish.
And kind of, but when it's accompanied by flannel and "Don't Tread on Me," paraphernalia, you go, oh, not we're tilling the earth, not butter churning here. One of the guys yelled out, "Let's go, Brandon!" And I just sort of made the executive decision in the moment, like, you know what? Let's address this, because this is something I've been wanting to sort of joke about and talk about, and now I have an opportunity. And about halfway through my set, I go, ooh, that could be some good YouTube content. Like, I wasn't thinking in the moment, because people don't usually interrupt me. So I'm not like prepared for comedian owns heckler kind of thing. I prefer comedian tells jokes and gets laughs.
So is that where? So what happens when I'm about to press play here? Where are we then? At what point in your set and what had just happened? Do I need anything else, or should I just hit it?
I'm not sure where you're starting because I shared like a couple of clips from it.
Well,
so why don't you play the clip you have, and then I can fill in if needed.
Like Joe Biden doesn't give off a lot of like fuck you energy. It's more like I'm like a nice old man. Vote me out in a couple of years if you think I'm a bad president. But if I wasn't president, I'd be feeding pigeons and reading a book. Not exactly the type of person that you fucking kick downstairs and go, "Let's go, Brandon," and then piss on him. Like that's something a little wrong with you if he's bringing out that much rage. Like that's all I'm saying is that it's like one thing to not like the politics or the whatever, but it's like he just seems, if you take politics out of it, he just seems like a nice old man. Okay, apparently he's a douchebag, unlike Trump, who is a strong Christian warrior.
That's just part of it. I mean, the whole thing is worth watching. And I love that clip. There must be so many moments where people are yelling, "Let's go, Brandon," at comedy clubs or any other live performance. I was at a football game, a junior high football game, and they were yelling it. How did they handle your response there? This is where I am, and I wrote this in my recap blog. Like I do that every time I come back from the road, because I've found that people really like them, and I enjoy kind of keeping a diary of my career ups and downs and trying to make it funny. But these people, they yelled, "Let's go, Brandon." So I spent the first half, which is not that clip, talking about how dumb "Let's go, Brandon" is historically for the. We have Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan, and now we've reached the "Let's go, Brandon" level of rhetoric for the Republican Party. And I said, and also from the people who are, and this is the part, the first half was about kind of mocking the people. You heckled, you're going to get mocked a little bit. This is your punishment. We'll work on reforming you in the second half of the bit, but this is the punishment. And I said, and how lame is it for the free speech, cancel culture complainers to all of a sudden be going, "Let's go, Brandon." Oh, aren't we naughty? Right,
you know what that means? Something else. "Let's go, Brandon." Cancel culture, freedom of speech. The left can't. "Let's go, Brandon." Oh my God! And I'm doing like a joke, like we're playing chess. The left is playing checkers. We're playing "Let's go, Brandon" chess. Then the second half, so that's how that first part ends. And then the second part, it ended with me saying, "Okay, can we have a truce January 6th table?" And I'll move on with my set. Yeah. Then the second half was You called them the January 6th table? Yeah. The second half was me trying in earnest, obviously while being funny. I'm not looking to have serious moments on a comedy stage, but trying in earnest to make them see, don't you get it? It's okay if you don't like Joe Biden, the president. It's okay. We can have different priorities, beliefs. But as in the clip you played, when you get super enraged and like personal against a guy who by all measures, and according to many of his opponents, is just some friendly guy that they all like personally. When you get into this, you fucking douchebag, scumbag, it's like, what? You've got to pause and go, wait. This isn't right. And if I had had more time, I would, the woman was like, "He's a douchebag." And I would have I wanted to stop and be like, I didn't want to derail the show. Right. I would have said, because if he's not a douchebag, let's just come with me for a second. If he's not a douchebag, if he's just a guy you disagree with politically, then you seem kind of crazy for being so mad and rude, right? Like if you're wrong about him personally, then there's no reason for you to be as mad and vulgar as you are. But this was an ad-lib thing. It wasn't a prepared
Right. Well, fair
thing.
enough. I mean, I would be really upset if I thought that Joe Biden stole the election, was going to take my guns, and is destroying my business with his lockdowns, not to mention, he is, allowing anybody who wants to come into this country. I can understand their rage. That's what they believe.
But as I always say, whenever I see these people in places like, I wasn't obviously in Florida or Texas, but I always get an extra kick out of the Florida and Texas people who are mad, because I go, what are you mad about? Your state is a free-for-all. So I don't even understand why you're mad. Nobody's doing anything to literally, you're being allowed to do whatever the fuck you want. So like this proxy anger at like, what, are you mad on behalf of Staten Island? Are you like, you know what I mean? Like,
that's a good point. No, I mean, it is interesting to think about the laws and in Florida, especially, you know, the only other thing I would add to the pro-Trump conservative grievance list would be, you know, taxes, which in Florida, they don't have to pay nearly as many in terms of property taxes. That's for sure, right? They don't have that, or is it the income tax? Either way,
income, state income. Yeah.
One of the reasons why their schools are not doing well, it's not the teachers, of course.
But the one thing I would add to that, because people obviously in many of the comments were like, "Oh, you can't talk to Trump idiots."
Yeah.
But I have a soft spot for people who are good audience members. Now, yes, they heckled a little bit and engaged with me. Granted, I was engaging with them, but they laughed at themselves, which was the unexpected part. They were laughing when I was mocking them. So they were, in a weird way, very good comedy audience. They never made it. They said, great show on the way out. And it was one of those things where I'm so naive sometimes, because I really do think I've had not friends, but comedy colleagues who went hard right. Like I'm talking QAnon hard right, who I find to be very funny and witty people, honestly. And it's always most jarring for me for some reason to see people, because I comedy, like a sense of humor to me is there's a reason like many people find it an attractive quality. I find it an attractive quality, even if it doesn't mean sexual attraction. It makes me think certain things about the way you see the world and think. So it's very jarring when I meet somebody who is like, hey, you have a good sense of humor. You seem to appreciate lots of different sides. And yet when we talk seriously, you have some really abhorrent views.
Right.
And I didn't meet these audience members, but I'd be lying if I hadn't met them at a comedy club and I simply saw them on TV yelling, "Let's go, Brandon," I would literally just go, what a bunch of ignorant douches. But the fact that they laughed, forget that it was just me, but the fact that they laughed at themselves gave me this kind of, well, maybe there's just 1% chance. And one of them laughed, like the girlfriend of one of them, I had talked about spring break, being on spring break. And I looked at the girlfriend, I said, you ever been on spring break? She looked like in her mid-20s, kind of cute. And she said, no. And I was like, well, then you got to get your guy to take you on a trip this spring, to Florida or something. You like Florida, it's MAGA, but like go to Florida. And she kind of smiled. And I said, you see that guy? I just gave you a great idea for a gift. So the next time you want to say, let's go, Brandon, for the lib cuck comic who just made your girlfriend smile a little bit and gave you a good gift idea, maybe that next time you want to say it, you go, I give Biden a pass this time because you know what? One of his guys was kind of nice.
Well, that's definitely not going to happen. What is going to happen?
I know, but what is
going to happen is that guy is probably going to end up physically abusing her and saying, "You think that lib cuck comic embarrassed me, and now you're going to get a beating." He might go full Tommy DeVito in Goodfellas with Sammy Davis Jr. Like, I get it. You like the half black comedian. I get it. Why do you keep saying it? Right. You really destroyed her life in retrospect.
She's dead. She's actually dead. I didn't mean to bring the show down.
Because of your comedy, people are now dying. Actually,
they call Cauvin the COVID of comedy.
Speaking of which, how are you dealing with, you've been really careful, responsible, a science-based guy. You're also one of the most moral and thoughtful people I know. So you're out there, you're performing, you're drawing people out now. What is I'm doing a gig this weekend with Christian and Ophira. And what is the responsibility of the performer? Did you do a meet and greet? Did you wear a mask? Did you make out with any of your fans?
Yes to everything. I wear a mask during a meet and greet.
Do they climb a ladder to kiss you?
Yeah, a comic once said, I walked into stand-up New York early in my career for like a guest spot or something. And the comic on stage, he said, Jesus, look at the size of this guy. Girls have to go up on him. And I thought that was very funny.
I like that.
But I do meet, I meet people. I got 3 shots. and I wear a mask when I'm meeting and greeting. I feel like, and then, Purell wash the hands after. I think that's, other than saying don't come near me, I'm doing it as safely as possible. But now for the next 2 weeks, I'm basically cocooning myself off because, and this is on my most recent episode of Righteous Prick Podcast. It's called Feeling Good, which is a pun on something in the episode. But I noticed I was feeling very optimistic, and I feel like you'd appreciate this. I am entering the single greatest stretch of my comedy career right now.
Wow. I
am going to headline the Chicago Improv, which is a club I flew myself out on a $400 flight for a $50 paycheck in 2010 to audition as a feature, got passed, never got booked in 11 years, the feature. I am then going to headline a club in an improv in Northern California, an improv, not an improv, but Flappers in Burbank.
Yep.
And then going to headline a club in Utah in between seeing 2 Utah Jazz games, my favorite sports team. After that, I come home. I'm going to be on Billions season 6. My episode will be towards the end of February. And then I will be hopefully in the end stages of producing my first special, putting that together, hopefully for a spring release. And I thought of that and I said, I'm going to really have to work hard to stay in this moment because it's finite right now. But that is literally what I want my life to be. Like the next, other than the 4 days a week, I'll be doing 8 to 10 hours of legal work. That's the little wrench in this fantasy. But that is what I want my life to be. That is what I've been working for. So it's a finite experience right now, but that is literally going to be the best stretch of the almost 18 years I've been doing comedy. Now, I'm sorry, over 18 years, almost 19 years. Now, right after that, I have no gigs planned, no gigs booked, and knee surgery scheduled. So we're probably going to hit a very dark patch right after this utopia. But I just felt it was important. Like I reflected on that and said, I'm going to really try and stay in this moment for the next month and a half because what I just listed, it doesn't get better than that for somebody trying to really break through and make it their career. So it's a really good stretch coming up.
Well,
So,
congratulations. You deserve it. You've deserved it for a long time. And more importantly, I think you're going to be able to sustain it. So you're that good, you're doing that well, you're continuing to grow. And I think it's great. And I'm really happy for you to hear how happy you are. Now, I want to ask you a couple more questions, though, before we go. And that's great, all great news. But you've also made a couple of Trump videos lately that have been absolutely hilarious just because the news cycle won't end. But even if it did, you still find a way to work in almost everything. You've got Trump giving a, quote, powerful tribute to the legendary actor Sidney Poitier. You also have weighed in on last night that your Trump weighed in on University of Alabama losing to Georgia, and you did a hilarious thing. You blamed Stacey Abrams for that, and
scoreboard fraud.
I thought that was really very funny. And of course, also your Trump reacted to the death of Robert Durst. Just a few of the latest Trump videos that were absolutely hilarious, but it must feel good that Richard Marx shared your stand-up comedy videos as well.
It was. And that's one of those things where I try to, as you can imagine, when somebody goes, never caught your stand-up, but obviously you're really good. I'm like, cool. Yeah. For 2 years, you've been following me and you've ignored everything that isn't a Trump video. Thanks, great fan. But, that I suppressed that now. But yes, it was very good because I'd like people to see, even if it has to be politically kind of tangential to what I was doing, people can see that I can really rip it up there and they see me off the cuff also. So, it felt very good to see a lot of people sharing that finally and not just the latest impression video. Here's
just a sample, and everybody should watch it on YouTube, give them the numbers. But here is Trump consoling the University of Alabama after the University of Georgia last night stole the national title.
And as you know, Alabama has won so many. They've won, I think if I coached football, I might have even won more. Nick Saban once told me, he said, "Sir, I'm glad you're not coaching because you'd be tough." And I think he's right.
called him Nick Saban, Nick Satan.
The Sidney Poitier one was a particularly great one. And obviously, when it comes to sensitive things like that, I toe the line so that Trump remains the joke, never the person who has passed, unless it's like a horrible person.
Sure.
But YouTube stopped running ads on that because they said it was sensitive. So I challenged it. And then 2 days later and 20,000 views later, which is probably about $250, they said, oh, yeah, it's good. It's good to go. So I lost all that ad revenue. But no, I was very proud of that one also because, you know, with Sidney Poitier being this dignified person.
We lost Sidney Poitier. And I came into my office saying, sir, we lost Sidney. And I said, not Sidney Powell. We can't lose that kind of talent. And they said, no, Sidney Powell's fine. She's right now barking at the moon naked. We lost Sidney Poitier, the legendary African-American actor. And I said, oh, that's too bad. You know, he was talented. He was class act. So he will be missed. But I will tell you this. I had a very interesting exchange with him one time. You know, he walked up to me, you know, very tall, not as tall as me, but tall. And he said to me, call me Mr. Tibbs. And I said, oh, okay, they call you Mr. Tibbs. Well, guess what? A lot of people call me sir. A lot more than probably call you Mr. Tibbs. And I said, you call me sir? I'll call you whatever you like. You want to be Mr. Tibbs? I'll call you Mr. Tibbs. And he said, they call me Mr. Tibbs. And I said, okay, I heard that part. I didn't hear you call me sir. How about you call me sir? I'll call you Tibbs Esquire, which is sort of an upgrade from Mr. But only after you call me sir. And he said, good day, sir. And I said, okay, well, you called me sir. But how about that? That's called strong negotiation. So we'll miss Mr. Pontiac and all his cars, strong American cars. And, you know, it's a loss. You know, Mike Pence spent the whole day on just staring at black men on his right, Mike, you're on the internet all day. Morning, I think. I mean, you looked upset with yourself, but maybe it wasn't. Well, Mike Pence mourns in his own strong Christian way. But Sidney Poitier, you'll be missed, and you called me sir.
I absolutely love it. Famous Sidney Poitier lines and delivered like right out of the Trump impression into a pretty good Sidney Poitier as well.
I tried.
That's
my father was never a fan of he had a funny line, which is maybe not appropriate now, but you know, he always said to me, whenever I see Sidney Poitier acting in a movie, all I see is Sidney Poitier. Meaning it was just, I think he came almost from that Charlton Heston theater school, that like pre-Brando kind of naturalistic acting style. But I always found that to be a funny line.
I always felt that way about Mel Gibson. Seriously.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was always like, ugh, it's Mel Gibson. He always looks psycho in real life and in all of his roles. Yeah,
that's true. Did you think that before he became problematic?
No, I was not surprised though that he was problematic. Like it made me stop thinking he was a good actor. How about that? I was like, no, this guy's really a psycho all the time. He's like that intense. And so we could talk about Mel Gibson's characters and how they transferred or we interpreted them. But I wanted to also ask you just about a couple of other things regarding, well, first of all, just it's relevant. Yesterday, in quotes, Dr. Anthony Fauci was answering questions from U.S. senators and Rand Paul. He and Rand Paul went at it. At this point, a lot of people have heard it, and I will have played it already on today's show. But what did you tweeted about that? Or you shared somebody's tweet about that. What do you think about that? I wanted to ask your take on a couple of things, as always.
Well, here's the issue, and I think this is probably why you're bringing it up. In one respect, it's always nice to see somebody just serve some of these GOP assholes some of their own medicine. But in the Trump world, it's become the sort of don't get down in the mud with a pig.
Right.
All you'll get is dirty.
Right.
And that's become a little bit of the modern GOP, which is like, we just want to drag down we'll be content with a tie. We can't win on the merits, but if we can drag your doctors, your senators, you're into frustrated Twitter jokes and memes and trying to own the GOP, if they resort to some of our tactics and rhetoric, we kind of win because we lose on the merits. So as long as we are dragging them into a battle of bullshit, we're kind of winning. Because the problem, but the flip side to this is, aren't we also in a culture now where, you know what? Anthony Fauci telling Rand Paul to suck he didn't do this, but if Fauci said to Rand Paul, why don't you suck my dick, you fake doctor?
Yeah.
Yes. Some people, Fox News would go, I can't believe it. Oh my God, look at what a monster Fauci is. But a lot of people in the middle, both intellectually and politically, might go, I kind of fucking like that Fauci went there. Do you know what I mean? Like you go to Congress with the population you have, not the population you want. And I think we are an intellectually and morally debased culture at this point.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, a lot of people, I don't want to traffic in that so much, though. I mean, I don't know.
Of course, but it's at some point, it reminds me of the Revolutionary War, and then the Civil War, where it's like the side that's going to inflict the most casualties is the one that doesn't abide by you line up this way,
right?
Take out your musket and you fire. No, hide in a bush, hide in a tree, burn their house down when they're not home. Like that's who wins a lot of the time, sadly.
Wow, I'm just seeing this looking at your Twitter feed, and this is true. Apparently, Ted Cruz's teen daughter, who deserves nothing but privacy, but has come out as bisexual. She described herself as bisexual on TikTok and said she, quote, basically disagrees with the far-right senator on everything from politics to her clothes. And I wanted to get your commentary on that, but more importantly, I was going to ask you about what you thought of Ted Cruz's appearance on Tucker Carlson. Dr. Ruth Ben-Ghiat wrote an amazing post about it, basically comparing Tucker Carlson to Goebbels and comparing that situation, Ted Cruz paying fealty to the master, in this case, to so many historical times where autocrats rose to and maintained power. Can we call him
Sniveling Chamberlain?
Yeah, or any number of other people whose names you could play on words in history where they had to kiss the ring. And Ted Cruz, he's in a tough spot in that apparently nobody likes him, from his daughter to Tucker Carlson and a lot of people in Texas. But B, he's really humiliated himself over and over, prostrated himself. What are the rest of the words? Put himself on a spit to be roasted.
Yeah, it's I think I've said this before on your show, and it bears repeating. What is Ted Cruz's end game? Like that, I understand politics is very transactional. You may flip-flop on an issue, you may cut deals, but Ted Cruz, what the fuck is you are an intellectual heavyweight that is debasing yourself in every way, mentally, morally, emotionally. You're white. Nothing is sacred to you. Your wife's looks, your father's reputation. As I joked on Twitter, I said, I think Ted Cruz is going to pull a little bit of a Dick Cheney here. And, he won't become an outspoken advocate for LGBTQ people. He may even go as far as to privately think it's a phase or she's going through something. But I don't think he's going to condemn or do anything but support his daughter. Now, if Donald Trump comes out and says, well, I looked at Ted Cruz's daughter, and let me tell you, I can see why she's doubling up on partner opportunities because I don't think there's going to be a lot of people looking to get with her. If I can be told, she is
by the time she was 13, Ivanka, had me sprung as a father. I say that as a father, not as a sort of creepy person. But with Ted Cruz's daughter, I think she's got to go for, maybe bestiality, because I don't think men or women are going to go for her. Then the test is, what does Ted Cruz say then? Does he go, Donald's a character. He's a character and he's always going to say what's on his mind. Obviously, I disagree. You know what I mean? Like at what point does Ted Cruz just say, the next time I see Donald Trump, I'm going to kick him in the teeth?
Is there it's such a weird, he is such a, by the way, I don't
know what Ted Cruz's daughter looks like, by the way, just to be clear, that was in character. That was not me speaking for myself.
I was gonna give you a little more cover there. And what has always been said is that, and this has come true, sadly, many times, the crazy things Cauvin's Trump says often are very close to almost exactly what he eventually says. And it would not be out of character for Donald Trump to attack Ted Cruz's daughter. It just wouldn't be. He's attacked other people's kids, I'm sure. I don't have any off the top of my head, but I don't think he has a line that he won't cross. I think that's fair to say, right? So number one, it's not unrealistic that he could do such a thing. But furthermore, like, if masculinity and manliness and bravado and macho-ness are important characteristics, the worst thing that could be done to a man, I suppose, or to the dignity of your masculinity, would be to attack or insult your wife or the women in your life, because you're a tough guy and you got to protect them.
Your women folk have been they demand recompense, or whatever the fuck they would say in Deadwood.
So how can anybody look at Ted Cruz and have any kind of respect or dignity if those are character qualities that they respect, that kind of masculinity? And if maybe it's just like, I don't care what happens as long as he's just owning the libs. I don't know. I don't know what else to think.
It's honestly, he is somebody that I question whether, all the jokes about him being the Zodiac killer. I don't think that, but I do question, like, is he not mentally ill, but is there a real deficiency there somewhere in his mental makeup? Because what do you, like, I still don't, I just can't comprehend. This is obviously coming from somebody who's not afraid of, getting kicked out of comedy clubs because they write blogs about the shittiness of the condo. But I don't know what job, I don't know what River Center Comedy Club, San Antonio, Texas has now since closed. But I wrote a very funny blog midweek about how many roaches I found in the condo. And a stalker of mine sent the blog to the club midweek, and then I was banned from both clubs after the week ended.
After the week ended, they talked to you?
They talked to the person who booked the clubs, and they said River Center and LOL. And I made it like a funny blog because I was like, in case they see it, I want it to be like lighthearted, not like, I can't believe they put me here. But what it really was I can't believe they put me here. The point being, Ted Cruz is a Harvard law educated, former Texas Solicitor General, 2-term senator. His wife worked for Goldman Sachs. There is not a material need or an employment need that he could not fill with ease if he were no longer a senator. And you just sort of look and you go, there are a lot of hypocrites and they're on both sides of the aisle. But Ted Cruz really is a unique creature where you go, I look at Mitch McConnell and I say, well, power matters to him. Right. I can carve out his life philosophy by that can be a guiding principle. His guiding principle is not something maybe we consider a principle, but it is a framework for how he makes decisions. Yeah,
power, stay in power, do whatever it takes. Yeah.
Ted Cruz's, I genuinely don't know.
Right.
That's what's so weird is I go, is it ethics? Well, no, because defending his own family came second.
I think that, don't you think
currying favor?
Isn't it just kind of as simple as kind of a narcissism similar to Trump? Like, just as long as people are talking about me, as long as I'm getting attention, as long as I'm in the light, it doesn't matter what they're saying.
But is he delusional? Because like I said, we can bring it back to you insulted my father. You claim my father had something to do with murdering an American president.
Worse than insulting you, you insinuated that my dad had something to do with killing.
It was a traitor and a conspirator in a murder.
My dad.
Then you shared. Let's say you don't have a good relationship with your dad.
So it doesn't matter quite as much.
You're like, he's kind of a dick. Trump's right. Then you go, but then you shared a bad picture of my wife for the world to see, proclaiming her as an ugly woman.
Right.
And that's the mother of my kids. That's my partner, my wife. I love her. I took a vow to honor and protect and defend this woman. And I'm a Texan who wears boots and has a gun. And I just kissed the ring. I was steaming for a week, and then I just continued to defend this person who is my intellectual inferior, because I don't know why. And that's once again, why not go out in a blaze? Like,
because he doesn't get to be a U.S. senator if he confronts Donald Trump. If he doesn't get to be,
it doesn't addictive. You have these guys.
He wants to be president.
Chuck Grassley. Well, but that's part of the delusion. I mean, it ain't happening, Ted. Sorry, is not happening.
That's why he goes on on Tucker Carlson and prostrates himself, because he wants to be president. He wants to be the nominee this time around. He has to. Tucker Carlson will definitely decide, I would imagine, more than anybody other pundit, who the nominee is.
It's going to be Ron DeSantis, I think, if it's not Trump. But it's going to be Trump.
We could debate that. Well, let's move on from. Yeah. I have one more question I want to ask you if you have time.
Yes, I do.
But we'll button up the Ted Cruz thing with one of my favorite jokes about Ted Cruz from Al Franken.
Oh, I know this one.
Here's the thing you have to understand about Ted Cruz. I like Ted Cruz more than most of my other colleagues like Ted Cruz, and I hate Ted Cruz. So last week was January 6th, and it probably would have been a good time to talk to you. It was also, we heard from the Attorney General Merrick Garland on what he's going to do about that and what he's going to do about voting rights. And I just wanted to get your take on where you think we are in January here, legally with the January 6th committee. Of course, you're you worked at, what did you do? You did some things. You get this. You have some credibility to comment on this. And even if you didn't, even if you didn't, you're better than me. So go ahead.
If I'm not the legal eagle, I'm the legal street pigeon.
Well, yeah, but he's a con law. You know, anyway. Go ahead. What are your thoughts on where we're at and how Garland's doing and what January 6th, the anniversary, meant?
January 6th to me it was very jarring watching it, because I have, if there's one demographic of people who scare me the most, like if I'm walking down the street late at night, it is the sort of red hat, flannel, rifle, trashy, like the people checking into the hotel right before me in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to be honest. They looked like two guys who were told, you can't come with us on January 6th because you're too scary. With January 6th, to me, though, the scariest thing about it,
they let a guy with a crazy beard and a Holocaust denial sweatshirt on. What were these guys wearing?
Right. It was really just being that up close to two guys who, if they weren't at January 6th, desperately wanted to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what bothers me most about January 6th, it really isn't the events of that day, as scary as they were. It really is that the GOP almost entirely got back in line within 2 weeks. That is the scare, because in all these books, and I think it was the two authors, I can't remember their names, but I think it was When Democracies Die or How Democracies Die. This was a book from a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There's supposed to be, when one party sort of capitulates and gives up their sort of role, that's one of the huge factors in fucking up a democracy, because the Senate this is one of my things, and I'm sorry to go, but the Senate, that's fine. I think people have forgotten what the Senate was supposed to be. The House is actually, in my opinion, being the House. That's why they're elected every 2 years. They are supposed to be the most connected to the whims of the voters. So they're not supposed to be a dispassionate, long-range body. They're just supposed to be there going like, Marjorie, you know what, as fucked up as she is, and this is a product of gerrymandering, Marjorie Taylor Greene is less offensive to the nature of our government than Mitch McConnell, in my opinion.
How so?
Because Marjorie Taylor Greene is the id, I guess, to use she has constituents who are like, I love Trump, I hate Democrats, Jewish space lasers, go win freedom for us. There are people out there who she doesn't command a majority in terms of her most fringy ideas, but she clearly represents a district. But the Senate, and I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying they're still outnumbered, and gerrymandering is creating a much stronger parity in the House than there should be. It should be a dominantly Democratic body, but it's not. That's gerrymandering. But what offends me more is the senators who act like every election is each year. Like they're supposed to be doing the long range good for the country. Like, hey, we have longer tenure than the president. Our terms are 6 years, not even 4 or 2. So we're supposed so when a guy like Joe Manchin has no foresight and no desire to look beyond his yearly stock reports, when Mitch McConnell just simply views things as obstruction is his job because he's just trying to block until he can get power again. I feel like at least in the blessed framers' mind, they were given 6 years because they were supposed to look for the long-term health. That's why they have longer terms. So to me, when the House is fucked up, I think that was partly envisioned. Right. You have 435 congressional districts. A couple of them are going to be Madison Cawthorns and Marjorie Taylor Greenes. You hope not a lot, but a few will be, because it's a big, messy body that is literally supposed to kind of be reacting to the people. The Senate is supposed to be, they love doing that bullshit of like the deliberative body. Yes, when it comes to stopping the filibuster, they become the deliberative body. When it comes to progress, legislation, climate change, the future of the country, they are operating on like fiscal quarters in terms of their long range ideas. So I just think the Senate has been far more bastardized in terms of its original purpose than the House. That said, that's what I found fucked up about January 6th is that none of these senators, very few, shouldn't say none, very few could step beyond, well, I might not win. With Mitch McConnell, he's safe, isn't he? Didn't he just get reelected?
I'm not sure when he is up. I'll look it up, and I don't know. I think he's getting less. I think he's in less good shape than he ever was potentially.
But I think he just beat like Amy McGrath, like in 2019, maybe?
I think in 2018.
2018. He's also, once again, 908 years old. So it's like this. There is obviously such a corrupting influence to the Senate that makes these people desperate to cling to being called senator and getting into like the fancy cigar lounge because it makes no sense. He just got reelected.
Go. He's up for reelection in 26.
So and once again, what that proves is somebody like him, his only concern is how quickly can I become majority leader again? He's in no threat of being ousted.
Right.
He may die in office. He's old enough.
He's old.
But his only concern is, no, I'm operating because I want to win back my seat in less than 2 years as majority leader. So I'm operating like a member of the House of Representatives. I am here to obstruct and to get us power
Although
again.
Couldn't you see him quitting?
No. I mean, not now. Like after just seeing how he operates, no. I think he will. I think he will die in office.
79.
Yeah. So I think there are far too many senators. That's what was distressing is that you had the easiest possible excuse to walk away from Trump. You know?
They couldn't. They just didn't think. The clear calculation is that if they did, that they would not be able to be reelected. Isn't that the simple calculus?
And it's and to me, if I'm a millionaire in my late 70s and I worry about losing my job, then I've done life wrong. Because no, seriously, like if comedy, here's a perfect example. If I become a national headliner in 2023, like just a special blows up for me and I got a TV deal and all of a sudden you check back in with me in 2040 and my net worth is $38 million and I have won Emmys and an Oscar, and then I'm on a set when I'm 68 years old and the director like punches an actress in the face. If I'm afraid of walking off the set because this is Spielberg Part 2, or whoever the guy in Hollywood is, the Harvey Weinstein meets Steven Spielberg meets Denzel Washington in some Voltron of the greatest Hollywood figure of all time. If I can't walk away, admittedly, from a career that I worked hard to build, if I can't walk away and say, well, I'm 68, I'm rich, I've done what I came here to do, the only reason for me to stay is I still want to make movies, then I'm a piece of shit. And I should go up to that director, slap him in the face and report him to the police and say, I'm done with Hollywood. You all suck.
Right. That's what a person.
And I'm saying, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt to say, hey, you know what? Some people, hey, you're a struggling actor. Sometimes you make compromises. These are people who have achieved prestige. Well, there is no compromise other than your own disgusting ego. That's it.
You have to wonder if you're that egotistical. You have to wonder, don't you care what your own children will think about what you did? And I guess it's just maybe my own personal values, but God, can you imagine being Ted Cruz's daughter or Donald Trump's son or Mitch McConnell? Like, I don't know. I thought Mitch McConnell's like first wife and kids are kind of like, he's kind of a scumbag. That's true. They are, I think, estranged. I think that's true.
And that tells you so much. That tells you so much about him. At least Donald Trump, to his credit, was able to really manipulate and mentally abuse his kids into thinking they love him.
Well, I don't know if they... Do you really think that they think that?
I think there is a what is that called? Stockholm syndrome, especially with Don Jr. Because Don Jr. hated his father. I had respect for, what? When I read a long profile on Don Jr. once. I think it was in New York Times magazine. He didn't speak to his dad for like 3 years after like the messy, disgraceful way he kind of cheated on Ivana. His mom. He wanted to join the military, and Trump Sr. said, like, you're disowned if you do that, because he respects the military, I think was what Sr. was saying. But that Don Jr. is also a legitimate, and trust me, I think he's an asshole, clearly, but he is a legitimate sportsman, if you will. I hate all that killing of animals and stuff, but that he's kind of in a weird way the real deal. Like, he really is into hunting. It's not just for show, for like owning the libs. Like, he's been into it for a long time before. And I look at somebody like that and I go, but now he either has come to grips with like, my dad controls everything and I might as well just buy in, or he's so good at pretending because he wants his own future
he's got him
in politics.
It's hard to know.
How do you can go from I made amends with, he is my father. Yeah. I made amends. But it tells you something that all those kids did exactly like the GOP. He humiliated your mother. It doesn't mean there can't be forgiveness. That's a good thing, I think, forgiveness. But this idea of like, my dad's the fucking greatest, and Ivanka is like, yeah, your dad like definitely your dad wants to have sex with you. It's not it's not even like subtle where it's like your dad, it thinks you're hot. Like, not in that Pete Dominic, I'm trying to boost my daughter's self-esteem and I tell her she's beautiful. In the way, like, I want to touch your leg and like get you into a dark booth at a club and get you drunk. Like, that's the vibe Trump has for his own daughter. So when these kids, I don't understand. I don't get it. So when you said when you asked me, I think like, oh, do you think they really do love him? I said they either do or they've just drunk the Trump Kool-Aid and are like, yeah.
I think they're probably more like him in that you stay attached to anybody or anything until it becomes a lost leader or unuseful, and then you just set it free, or you don't set it free. That sounds nice. You kick it to the curb and punch it while it's down. And
yeah,
I think
you know what they say about love. You set it free, and if it says racial slurs and misogynistic things and comes back, it's true love.
All right, we'll end it there. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
There he goes. We almost always end on a big laugh with JL. JLCauvin.com for all of his stuff. Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Cameo, and all the rest. See him live coming up in Chicago, San Jose, Burbank, and Utah. Just a few of the dates. JLCauvin.com. Listen to the podcasts and support him. He's a big supporter of mine. He actually listens to the show. He subscribes to the show. He donates to GiveWell.org as well. I hope you have GiveWell.org/standup. Don't forget about today's sponsor. If you're looking to hire anybody for your firm or your company, Indeed.com/standup. Also, Truebill.com/standup sponsoring shows this week as well. Want to save money, go to Truebill.com on all those subscriptions that keep renewing without your permission. All right, that's it. That's all the plugs. See us in Pennsylvania this Saturday night, King of Prussia. And John Carroll going to sing us out right now. I love you. I'll talk to you tomorrow, and thank you.
We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well, and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.